Hi, my name's Jennifer Swan and I'm presenting a piece of work that I've been doing with Uniting Care Wesley Port Adelaide on creating preferred family trees and adjusting the recipe of collective narrative practices. So I've been looking at addressing issues of intersectionality and accountability when working with groups of white Australian people tackling issues of violence, marginalisation and mental health issues. So I live and work in the Port Adelaide region of South Australia, and I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people who are the traditional custodians of this area and continue to have a rich and ongoing connection to this country. People from England and other European countries invaded this area in 1836, and this is where I live and work. It used to be called Port Misery. I've been facilitating a group using narrative practices with people who are using their lived experience of mental illness to assist others in dealing with similar issues. Most of the people in this group are from European ancestry. We've used a number of different narrative practices, including externalisation, outsider witnessing, remembering practices, the tree of life and the team of life. I haven't got my little dog Sissy here today, but she's been facilitating the group with me, and she just brings a lovely lightness and I guess gives people a different way of being in the room and being with each other. Animals are very important in the lives of a lot of people who are struggling with issues of mental health, and some of the most successful and significant relationships people have had in their lives have been with animals. So it's a really lovely way to bring those conversations into the room. I've also been looking, or we've been looking at finding ways for the lived experience workers to actually step more into the role of running the group, and me stepping out. And we've been working with the Dulwich Centre to try and find ways to support people in doing this work, so they can start more groups in different parts of Adelaide and build up their skills to support each other, which has been really exciting. I'm not going to share a lot of stories from the group per se, because we're still working to develop a collective document, but I will share a story about Ag, and I've been negotiating with her around making sure it's safe and to get her permission to share that story. And we've had many meetings to negotiate this. So over time, the group regraded their preferred identity and found ways to speak about mental health issues that did not pathologise themselves or others. The group developed a collective sense of pride and acknowledged the unique ways we could use insider experience of the mental health system to walk alongside others. They named themselves the Squid Group. This name came from an awkward squid character that was collectively developed when we used externalising practices to elicit an image that could be a way to describe what got in the way of people attending the group. And this is just a piece of writing that the group actually came up with to be able to describe what we did and who was Squid. So who is Squid? A personification of the inner dialogue we all have that may hold us back. Once we identified the squid, it enabled us to feel safe to discuss issues around what steps were needed to live well alongside it. I'd like to give a personal context for my intentions around this work, and a bit of background about my family. My father's family were forcibly transported from England to New South Wales, Australia in 1818, and over many generations became quite wealthy. My mother's family came from Glasgow and Northern Wales and arrived here after World War II. I was born in Sydney, but raised in Adelaide with my mother's family, who have struggled through many storms with the hope for a better future in Australia. Drawing upon traditions of love and care has enabled us to navigate through many complex issues. These traditions of love and care have informed my commitment and interest in this area of work. What I learned from the struggles faced by my own family were that issues of gender, class, race and migration profoundly influenced the ways we made meaning of our experiences and the space and resources we have access to. We found ourselves in a country where we had opportunities that were not available to us at home, but they were only available because of the invasion and attempted genocide of the first people of this land. I learnt that we had multiple aspects to our identities. In some ways we were oppressed, and in some ways we oppressed others. I noticed that issues of power and privilege were always in flux and relational. Context and history are always influencing the way we make meaning of ourselves and others. So in 2009, I studied collective narrative practices here at the Dulwich Centre, and I started facilitating Tree of Life groups with Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who were struggling with the effects of violence and mental health issues. During these groups, I noticed how people from cultures that privileged collectivity, particularly Aboriginal people, responded really well to these practices, and it strengthened their resistance to the effects of violence. So we created a collective document together. So I've had permission from the author of this story. She's an elder woman, and it's called Calling on Our Ancestors to Heal Our Spirits. Listening to our ancestors has guided me in healing from our children being taken away. When my grannies were taken away by Families SA, it brought the bad times back. Our family has a long history of being taken away, which has broken our hearts and spirits. It has left me feeling deep sadness and animosity towards others. My language, my dreaming stories, art, Mother Earth and kinship help keep me in touch with our cultural values. I've been guided by my parents and used my skills of being able to listen and cry to help me heal. I've hung in there through the many hard times and called upon my ancestors for healing and guidance. I've learnt how to help others to bring our children home. I've taken charge and decided to be positive and help my community to make good choices and not let the hard times run our lives. I've found ways to challenge Families SA constructively to try and stop our children from being taken away. I've joined with other grannies so we can understand what and why these hard things have happened, so we can keep fighting for justice. I noticed that sometimes the link to ancestral and cultural histories of support were thin on the ground amongst the white people within the Squid group compared to those in the Elizabeth Women's Tree of Life group. And they were particularly thin on the ground with white people who'd experienced marginalisations due to violence and exclusion. When I asked the members of the Squid group what had made it possible to be able to use their lived experience to help others, I sometimes heard, I didn't have anyone helping me. I had to do it on my own. This story of doing it on your own made a lot of sense when people have experienced abuse in many areas of life. But I was aware that there were many other stories where they had been supported and provided support to others. It was these neglected stories of support that could provide a riverbank of safety to be able to strengthen up people's connections and sustain them in this work. So I began to think about the ways I was using narrative practices and how they could be used with marginalised white Australian people in ways that regraded their identities and also addressed issues of privilege and power. I was concerned that stories told of individual struggles done in isolation and through individual effort did not strengthen people's connection to community. I wondered what were the effects of telling stories dislocated from histories of support could implicitly contribute to isolation rather than richly describing the ways they had navigated the effects of violence, marginalisation and mental illness. I wanted to find ways to increase the space for second story development that made visible issues of power and privilege and drew upon what was significant and intimately known by each member of the group. So I began to focus on the aspects of the Tree of Life that richly acknowledged multiple histories of contribution. and thought about ways I could alter the recipe when working with white marginalised communities. I also looked at other social movements that had struggled with issues of marginalisation, privilege and essentialist discourses of identity, particularly the gay rights movement. So I guess it's an adjunct to the roots on the Tree of Life. I did an exercise that I've come to describe as a chosen family tree. So this broke away from traditional notions or normative understandings of what a family was and what it could be. And these are some of the questions I asked the group. What are some of the most valuable and helpful aspects of your work and life? Why are these important to you? Could you draw a family tree and only put on the people, places, pets and events that have supported these important things? Trace these connections as far as you can in any way you want to. Can you trace these connections to people, places and things that you hope might be possible in the future because of the contributions of those on your preferred family tree? When we made our chosen family trees, I noticed that there were many animals and people on the trees, and they followed structures that were non-linear and very specific to each person. They broke away from normative ideas of family and genealogy. I noticed that people told stories of richer relationships about people, ideas, places and culture in more unique ways than they did when they had been doing their roots on their Tree of Life. I particularly liked the ways it enabled people to trace these lineages of support that suited their own ways of thinking rather than what is usually considered normal. One of the Squid members did a chosen family tree based on Dungeons and Dragons and set in outer space. Many people in the Squid group had experienced violence both within their own families and the mental health system. They told deeply moving stories of violence in relationships, hearing voices and being so exhausted from anxiety that it was too hard to leave the house. People spoke of being chased by ambulance workers across backyards and the shame of having their kids and neighbours watching, of being told what to do rather than being asked what would be helpful. This had often led to shame and broken trust, getting in the way for them to be able to use their knowledge to support others. If I was going to ask people to take the risk of stepping into new territory, a lot of careful preparation had to take place. This work took a long time and it was built on the backs of many relationships. Ongoing consultations at every step of the way were a really important aspect of this work. We all had to navigate tricky relationships of power as the group's identity was regraded and they stepped into new territories. I often look for guidance in my work by remembering the persistent love and care of my Naini. She had made it possible to navigate through the tricky waters and violent storms. I wondered if gathering an archive of story from elders within the lived experience field of mental health could also be a way to sustain and guide us through complex negotiations of power. So I met with Ag. She's a member of the Squid group and has been working as a lived experience worker for many years. She began this work over 20 years ago and was one of South Australia's first peer educators with the Schizophrenia Fellowship. I was really drawn to her commitment to strive for what might be possible and her consistent stance in respecting and supporting people with lived experience to lead the way in doing this work. I interviewed her about the history of activism and what guided her. She told me about how she'd drawn support from many divergent thinkers and social movements, including punk rock, anarchism and nature. She began working with families who were striving to make space for their children when they were being excluded from many realms of life because of mental health concerns. So I asked Ag what principles of learning from the lived experience movement were most significant to her. She said, "When I was young, I felt my experience was a bit weird and I didn't fit in. I got involved in the punk rock movement because it was full of divergent thinkers. I never thought I would have a job because I didn't fit the dominant work-life paradigm. I knew that people get money mostly from conforming and I didn't think it would be possible for me to have an income and the social validation. Being a lived experience worker made it possible for me to pursue my lifelong dream of buying a trailer load of trees to plant a magical forest inland in the country. Peer work has changed how I feel about myself. It has made it possible to help other people, and I know I had something to offer. Intellect, verbal acuity, stubbornness, curiosity, and a sense of adventure. I don't care about being scared and not always knowing where this is going to lead. In my conversations with Ag, I've always come away with a renewed sense of what is important in this work, and she has helped keep me on track when the tactics of power and control were getting in the way. Now, this work is still in its early stages, but it has been a really helpful and accessible way to introduce intersectional considerations of power and privilege for groups of people struggling with marginalisation and also belonging to the dominant white culture in Australia, by remembering connections that embrace complexity and contradiction from within rather than from outside of people's experience. Insider knowledge can be used to navigate complex relationships of power and re-story histories of support along multilineal rather than linear lines of inquiry across time and place.